can kind of imagine, I think most people imagine these with large frameworks of like a cage above them, and this is the bottom part with the you know, the ring and the stopper to hold people in, to hold the parrots in. Very important, again, the pottery from this time period plays a very important part of the traffic in this stuff today, but both the trafficking and the research allows us to tie down this period in some detail. Well, that gives you a little bit of background on the remains. That's sort of a little bit about the world that they lived in. Some of the connections and some of the elements of the network that I'm talking about. The next part is how did they get there? Theft, corruption, commerce, and more, or what goes around comes around. The remains from the cave, the mummies, were vaulted out of that world and into a much larger world in sometime between 1905 and 1911 when they arrived in Washington, D.C. And the paperwork associated with their travel is kind of interesting. Main character at this point, sort of following in the footprints, here you can see his feet, of Carl Lumholtz, was a character by the name of A. Houghton Blackiston. And Blackiston, pictured here, kind of looks like Humphrey Bogart. He's got a cigar or a cheroot of some sort in his mouth there. He's actually holding one of the mummies very fondly in his arms sometime after about 1905, because he writes this article in the American Antiquarian about that time. And he published a series of articles at the time that we can follow to get quite a few details about what he was up to. He's described as a mining engineer who worked in the area looking for minerals and oil, I suppose, things like that. One of the elements of this whole story is that I go and find out more about this character, and I certainly plan to. But at this point, what we really know about him is that in between all this mining he was doing a lot of archaeology / tomb raiding. And he probably was able to fund a lot of his activity on the basis of removing this stuff, somehow getting it across the border, and selling it to museums in the United States, museums like the National Museum in Washington, D.C., or other museums such as the High Foundation, which later became the Museum of the American Indian. So he was pretty active, and I really need to find out more about him. But I think this sort of tells a little story, just a picture there. He did take a kind of a scientific approach in that he recorded a lot of information about what he was doing, a little bit about the context, so we know more than just what Lumholtz has told us, at least for this time period. These are the only references I'm going to talk to you about today. There's a lot of archaeological research that's been done in this area since then, but it's not really necessary to getting the basics of the story down here. This is what the Sierra looks like. There are places like this, places like the valley I showed you before. This particular little spot is interesting because it kind of gives you an idea that the area is sort of rough. And it doesn't, though, give you an idea why people were living there so much, because there's not too much room for agriculture in this particular little defile here. But there are other valleys where a considerable amount of food production can go on, and that's, of course, why the people of Cave Valley were in the area, and of course that's why many of these traveling scientists were in the area as well, to recover material, especially the pottery. Blackiston probably removed 2 boxcars full of material from various sites in the Sierra at the time, and as you'll see, that's pretty much outside any kind of formal permission from the Mexican government. This is the area. I showed you that picture before to kind of give you an idea of the colder areas of the southwest USA and the northwest Mexico. But this is a close-up of the dashed area. The dashed area, you can see the Mexico-USA border here today, which is not really important for this story, except that these entities exist. You can see Chihuahua City, the area I went to kind of begin the research on this project. Here's the big site of Paquimé. Here's the cave. Now the cave is in this area here to the left of where I'm indicating is mountainous, and out to the front is like desert and plains. It's kind of like the extension of the Rocky Mountains, as you might see in Denver or Albuquerque or any of these places, with lots of mountains to the west, plains and flat areas to the east. In this case, lots of desert. But this is really rough. The drive from here to here is about an hour and a half, and the drive from here to here is 4 hours. So it's quite limited in movement. I mentioned this other area down here because this is the area of one of the Native American groups still occupying the region today. This is the mountain Pima. They're sometimes referred to as the Pima Bajo, which simply means the Pima of the south in this case, because the Pima Alto, the Pima Alto live simply to the north. So there is some continuity, or at least there's an interesting connection between some of the Native Americans still living in this area today, the Pima being here, and then the Tarahumara, who are maybe more familiar to some of you, live down here in a place called the Copper Canyon. But this gives you a little bit of an idea of the area, and this line indicates sort of the domain of this place, Paquimé, in the 13th to 15th century, before the Spanish arrived. These are photographs taken by Blackistone of his work out in front of this cliff here back when. And he's excavating with his men, some of my men, at work in Cave Valley. He's excavating a site out on the flatland here, a big adobe structure which had been a residence of people who may have buried their dead in the cliff behind the house. So that gives you a little bit, kind of a more sense of a little bit of the identity of these people, knowing a little bit more about the kinds of archaeological sites that are found right in front of the cave. So how did the material get there? Well, these are just your plain old records from the National Museum showing the arrival of stuff, 1905, and again 1906. Material from Cave Valley, Indian implements here. Interesting, Blackistone's address right here in D.C. on Connecticut Avenue, and just another year later in Cumberland. And you'll see later that he's a resident of Maryland and well connected to some of the politicos of the time. And I just thought I'd sort of show you some of the correspondence that goes along with the days and the months related to the arrival of the remains. So he's writing a curator at the museum. I've just returned from the Mexican interior, where I've been doing some field work for a fair success, securing a number of mummies in one of the caves with cultural symbols. These cultural symbols were recorded by Lumholtz earlier, and a number of specimens and remains from village sites. I passed between two hostile armies and had to drive 185 miles overland to get back, all communication being cut. Will you be so kind, blah, 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 to do all this stuff for me in your museum? This is the first couple of years of the Mexican Revolution, by the way, and his larceny was probably aided to a great extent by the fact that there's a war going on in northern Mexico at this time. And so there was a lot of confusion and chaos that Blackistone basically used to kind of spirit these departed individuals away.